They locked her out of the briefing room until the colonel stood up for her. The early morning sun cut across the military base in sharp lines, casting long shadows over the concrete. Officers hurried between buildings, their polished boots echoing against the floors. It was the kind of day where every second counted, and one small mistake could cost respect, reputation, or worse. At the far end of the main command building, a young officer approached the briefing room, clutching a tablet and a folder of critical mission reports. Her uniform was crisp, her demeanor professional. But today, she felt the weight of doubt heavier than usual. The moment she reached the door, she realized something was wrong. The room was locked. She knocked firmly. "Sir, permission to enter," she called out, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. No answer. A few of the senior officers peeked at her from inside. Whispers rippled through the room. One of the officers sneered. "Wait, she's not supposed to be here," he muttered under his breath, smirking at a colleague. The young officer's brow furrowed. She knew she had been invited to this briefing. She had the authorization. Every protocol confirmed it. But protocol didn't seem to matter to the voices on the other side of the door. Inside, the room was bustling with officers reviewing intelligence reports and maps. The senior staff were deep in discussion. And yet, when her name was mentioned, there were dismissive laughs. "Maybe they sent her to the wrong room," one officer joked. "Yeah, probably some junior analyst," another laughed. She pressed her hand to the doorframe. She didn't respond with anger. She didn't argue. Instead, she straightened her posture and took a breath, waiting for someone with real authority to notice. Minutes passed. Her patience was tested. Her training told her to stay calm, to respect the chain of command, even when others ignored her authority. But the whispers and laughter made the atmosphere almost unbearable. Finally, a door clicked open. The colonel, an experienced leader with decades of service, stepped into the hallway. His expression was calm but commanding. He had watched the scene unfold. "Why is she standing outside?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying authority. A young officer stammered. "Colonel, we thought she wasn't part of this briefing." The colonel's eyes narrowed. "Part of the briefing? She has every right to be in there. Step aside." The sneers vanished. The laughter stopped. The hallway went quiet. Even the senior officers inside the briefing room turned toward the door. The young officer looked at the colonel with gratitude but kept her composure. She stepped forward, tablet in hand, and followed him inside. The moment she entered, the energy in the room shifted. What had been dismissive and mocking just moments before turned into attentive eyes. The colonel had cleared the path. And in that instant, the young officer's presence commanded respect without a word. She didn't need to argue anymore. She didn't need to prove herself. The fact that a senior leader stood up for her said more than any explanation ever could. And for the officers who had doubted her, the lesson was clear. Authority and respect aren't given, they are recognized. As she moved to the front of the room, ready to brief the team, the colonel gave a subtle nod, a quiet affirmation that the young officer's knowledge and capability were not to be questioned. The stage was set. The briefing would begin, and nothing about her credentials would be ignored this time. The young officer stepped fully into the briefing room, her tablet and folder in hand. The colonel walked beside her, a silent shield of authority. Every eye in the room was now on her, some filled with surprise, others with skepticism. "Ladies and gentlemen," the colonel said, his voice firm, "she is authorized to lead this briefing. I expect everyone to listen." A hush fell over the room. The officers who had dismissed her earlier now sat up straighter. Their earlier smirks and laughter had vanished. Authority was contagious, and the colonel's support instantly commanded respect. The young officer nodded politely, setting her folder on the table. She didn't rush. She didn't show irritation. Instead, she opened her tablet and projected a detailed map onto the screen. Every marker, every symbol, every line was carefully plotted. "This is our operational overview," she began, her voice steady and precise. "We are tracking multiple high-risk areas, and each team's movement has to be synchronized to avoid unnecessary exposure." She clicked through slides, showing troop positions, logistics updates, and potential threats. Her analysis was meticulous. Her calculations were sharp. Every recommendation was backed by intelligence data. Some officers tried to interrupt, subtly challenging her recommendations. But the colonel's presence reminded them to pause. One officer who had earlier whispered mockingly leaned back in his chair, suddenly unsure of himself. The young officer noticed nothing but the room and the mission. She didn't need to call out disrespect. The precision of her briefing spoke louder than any words of authority. Minutes passed, and the room gradually shifted. The officers began to ask questions, not to challenge, but to clarify. The skepticism melted into engagement. They were listening. The colonel observed quietly from the side, satisfied. He knew that she had the knowledge, the preparation, and the composure to handle this briefing. And the officers now recognized that their earlier assumptions had been wrong. One of the senior officers finally leaned forward, looking directly at her. "Your operational analysis is impressive," he said. "I hadn't realized we had someone with this level of insight on the team." She acknowledged the comment with a calm nod, keeping the focus on the mission. "This briefing is about our objectives," she said. "Not about me. Everyone's role here is critical, and each decision impacts the team on the ground." The room was silent for a moment. Then another officer added, "Understood. Let's proceed with your plan." The atmosphere had changed completely. What began as doubt and mockery had been replaced with respect. The colonel gave her a subtle approving glance. His silent message was clear. She had earned her place, not through intimidation, but through competence, clarity, and composure. And outside, the memory of being locked out was already fading. She had entered with the colonel standing for her, and by the end of the first 10 minutes, every officer in the room knew that underestimating her had been a mistake. The briefing continued, but the tension in the room had transformed. Where there was once doubt and subtle mockery, there was now focus. Every officer listened intently, scribbling notes, checking tablet displays, and following her directions. She highlighted the areas of highest operational risk, detailing strategies that minimized exposure while maximizing effectiveness. Her calm tone and methodical explanations left no room for misinterpretation. One senior officer, who had been particularly dismissive earlier, leaned back and muttered under his breath, "I didn't expect her to know this much." A junior officer glanced at him and nodded, whispering, "Neither did I. But she's flawless with the numbers and strategy." The colonel watched silently, arms crossed, allowing the young officer to demonstrate her full capability. His presence alone had changed the dynamic in the room, but now it was her knowledge, clarity, and confidence that commanded attention. She switched to a new slide, a detailed layout of team deployment for the upcoming operation. Every movement, timing, and contingency was accounted for. She paused briefly, letting the room absorb the complexity of the plan. Then she looked directly at the general who had doubted her presence earlier. His expression was unreadable at first, but slowly, realization dawned. He had misjudged her. He had assumed that a young officer, locked out of a briefing, could not possibly handle such responsibility. "Your approach is precise," he said quietly. "I see now that every detail has been considered." The young officer nodded once, maintaining her composure. "Thank you, sir. My priority is ensuring mission success and the safety of our teams. Personal recognition is secondary." Across the table, other officers began asking more in-depth questions, testing scenarios and contingencies. She answered each one confidently, drawing from both experience and intelligence reports. Each response reinforced her authority, breaking down the last traces of doubt in the room. The general leaned back, silently observing. He had been proven wrong, not by arguments or rank, but by the officer's competence. The colonel standing beside her had given her initial support, but it was her preparation, clarity, and unwavering calm that had fully earned the room's respect. By the end of the session, the energy in the room had shifted completely. The initial whispers, doubts, and smirks were replaced with focused attention, respect, and a willingness to follow her guidance. The officer had not only survived the attempt to dismiss her, she had turned it into a demonstration of her skill and leadership. The briefing was nearing its end, but the impact of the young officer's presence was already clear. The room, once filled with doubt and subtle mockery, now hummed with respect. Every officer understood they were listening to someone who had earned her place, not through rank alone, but through knowledge, preparation, and composure. The colonel stood quietly near the door, observing. He had intervened to give her the chance to enter, but it was her performance that truly commanded authority. Every point she made, every scenario she analyzed, reinforced the fact that she belonged in that room. "Let's review team coordination for the next operation," she said, her voice calm and precise. "Timing and communication will be critical. Each unit must understand their role completely before deployment." She displayed the final slide, showing a detailed operational map, synchronized timelines, and contingency routes. Officers leaned forward, studying the layout carefully. Questions were asked, and she answered each with confidence, demonstrating not only knowledge, but leadership under scrutiny. The general, who had doubted her mere moments ago, spoke up. His tone had changed, quiet, but filled with acknowledgement. "You've earned your place here," he said. "I underestimated you. That was my mistake." The young officer remained composed, nodding politely. "Sir, the mission's success is the priority. Recognition is secondary." A subtle murmur of approval passed through the room. Even those who had openly mocked her earlier now recognized the lesson. Authority and respect are earned through action, not assumed through rank or appearance. The colonel stepped forward, giving her a supportive nod. That small gesture spoke volumes. He had given her the chance, but she had solidified her position entirely on merit. As the meeting concluded, officers began filing out, many pausing to acknowledge her professionalism. The general gave a final nod, one that carried quiet respect and recognition of her capabilities. Outside the briefing room, whispers circulated among officers. The story of what had just happened would spread quickly. The junior officer who had been locked out of the meeting had commanded respect from every senior officer in the room, simply by standing firm and demonstrating competence. It was a lesson that would resonate for a long time. Underestimate no one. Support those who deserve it. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one whose leadership can change everything. The young officer walked out with her head held high, her authority unquestioned, her place secured. The colonel followed closely, proud of the choice he had made to stand for her.